between 1966 and 1973, one of the greatest shows ever made for television ran in its first run, and then in syndication almost constantly throughout the 70s. And I grew up absorbing this show, Mission Impossible. I can't tell you that I understood the complex politics of the plots, but I understood deeply that the agents' cool under pressure of the Impossible Mission Force team allowed them to complete their tasks time and time again, and I coveted their cool. And when my father threw out a small Zero briefcase somewhere around 1974, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I had already learned at that point that in addition to Lego, a cardboard box and a roll of masking tape are one of the most powerful tools for creation ever invented. So I took a cardboard box, I cut out a sheet of it, and I put it in the bottom of that Zero case. Then I cut out a hole, and I used cell acetate, because my father was an animator, and I drew a radar screen. I lit it with a giant 6-volt lantern battery, which was what I was allowed to buy at the hardware store, and powered it with 2 flashlight bulbs that I literally taped the wires to. I then put toggle switches in there and a speaker grill, and I labeled one of the toggle switches in an amazing bit of prescience, detonate. And I spent hours in my yard pretending to get signals from other members of the Impossible Mission Force team and responding to them and correctly hitting detonate at the time it was supposed to be hit. Fast forward to 1981, I am 14 years old, and 1981 was an amazing time if you loved stories, and especially if you loved movies, to be 14 years old. The list of important and amazing films that completely shaped me is too long to go into here. Suffice to say, Escape from New York, Diva, Sharky's Machine, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Dragon Slayer, all came out that year. But there's this one movie that hit me that I want to talk about. And John Borman had been trying to make a version of Lord of the Rings since 1968. And when financing didn't come through on that because his vision of it was too expensive, he reduced his vision a little bit and made an amazing sword and sorcery film called Excalibur, his retelling of the Arthurian Grail legend. And this movie was a hard R. It was bloody, and there was guts and crows eating eyeballs out of skeletons, and there was sex. And I managed to convince my dad to take me to this movie twice. And in addition to all that other stuff, the thing that really captured me about the film was the armor. And the armor, you can't miss it in the movie. Every male character in Excalibur wears their armor everywhere, to dinner, to the bed, to sex. They're constantly wearing armor, and the whole story is told in armor. In the beginning, the armor is black and it's knobby, and when King Arthur builds the round table in Camelot, the armor is all sparkling. And I didn't know that I was seeing Nicole Williamson and a young Helen Mirren showing everybody else how to act. I didn't realize that I was watching Liam Neeson, Patrick Stewart, and Gabriel Byrne's first movie. What I knew was I saw this armor and it represented some type of transformation to me, and I wanted a piece of it. I came home and we had those lattice slats of wood protecting the underside of our house from raccoons, and I pulled one out of a spot that probably wouldn't be missed, and I went down to my dad's shop and I planed it into a sword shape. And I spray painted it with silver. And when it wasn't silver enough, I figured out that you could buy aluminized tape at the plumbing store. And I aluminized this sword blade, and I found a little glass bead, and I put it in the bottom of the hilt. And in the movie, Nicole Williamson's performance, he has this beautiful modulated voice, and I could hear his voice in my head as I picked it off the workbench. Behold the sword of power. And I felt the power. I really felt this object that I had made had this power to me. It had a weight, and it had a swing and a swish that I deeply craved. So for Halloween that year, this was the summer of 1981, for Halloween in October, I made myself a suit of armor, again, out of cardboard. I even made a white horse that I wore with suspenders, and I rode it around school. I lost the Halloween contest to a Mickey Mouse with big puffy hands. Then my father told me that there was an armor room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I made him take me. And if you've never been to the armor room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it is an absolute wonder. There are 4 mounted horsemen, horses wearing their own armor. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And I took a sketchbook and I made sketches of the armor and slowly built a notebook of reference because I wanted to make my own suit of armor. I still do. But I asked my dad for, I'm trying to figure out the exact timeline, but I believe somewhere in there I went into therapy because I was a lonely kid, and the therapist told my parents that I was too close to my mom and not close enough to my dad. Shocking. So my dad started to spend more time with me, and one of the things I guess that he did as a project was he went to the hardware store and he came back with a roll of roofing aluminum and some pop rivets and a pop rivet gun, and he taught me how to take planar forms like sheet aluminum and bend it and crimp it and tie it so that you could make compound curves, and slowly over several weeks we made me an aluminum suit of armor. We used buckles from rotting luggage we found in the basement, and we made everything. The cuisse, the tassets, the knee cops, the elbow cops, the placard, the helmet. I needed an excuse to wear this, which is, of course, Halloween, again, because every year at Halloween, everyone came in costume, and they went around and took pictures of everyone. Now, my first suit of armor is, in fact, visible in my 1981 high school yearbook because I stayed around all day and the photographer found me and took a picture. The second suit of armor, the aluminum suit, there are no pictures of it, and I'm really sad about this. But it's because I didn't last past third period in the armor. I went to math class, and I was standing in the back in my full suit of armor because I couldn't sit down. And even from the back, Ms. Salvarakis, my math teacher, said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And then I slid down the wall and passed out of heat exhaustion. And I woke up in the nurse's office, and in a key moment when life becomes an allegory for itself, I woke with a start and said, "Where's my armor?" My armor had been put on a shelf in the art room. Along with all these other things that I had built. I was incredibly prolific in the art room in my high school. By my junior year, I had made dozens and dozens and dozens of really elaborate things, many out of cardboard, but out of all sorts of mixed media. And my armor went on the shelf next to that, and I trusted that it was safe. But that summer, the principal went in and, in a fit of space-saving zeal, threw out that entire shelf of stuff, an act that so enraged me, I actually, at 16, consulted an attorney about whether I could sue him. I couldn't. But it so depressed me to lose those objects, but specifically the suit of armor, that I didn't build anything else for another 18 months. I went on to fall in love, deeply in love with film as a storytelling medium and as a method of transformation. And eventually ended up calling it a career. I got my first job in special effects in 1993 out here in San Francisco. I'd started off in the theater industry and got hired by my partner on Mythbusters, Jamie Heineman. And that led all the way to actually coming up here to Lucasfilm in 1998. I got hired on Star Wars Episode 1. And it was like dying and going to heaven. I was working with people that I'd been reading about since I was 11 years old when Star Wars first came out. And that was the second job I ever knew that I wanted, was to work on Star Wars. And here I was up in Kerner Boulevard and then eventually up here at the main house at the ranch working on Episode 2 and building spaceships and models. And one of the first things I discovered working on advanced and beautiful movies like I was working on here, worked on AI. I did all the destroyed buildings in New York. Space Cowboys. I helped build the space shuttle, and I did everything inside the payload bay. Terminator 3. Sorry about that. Second two Matrix films. Sorry about those too. But I learned as a model maker that, like every job in filmmaking, my job was to tell stories just as much as the director's was. That when you're gluing what we call greeblies to the side of a spaceship, you have to have an understanding of why every greebly is there. It doesn't have to be clear to anyone else, but that panel has to have an internal logic, and when it does, it feels right. And there are different logics to the Star Trek universe and the Star Wars universe. In Star Trek, it's totally okay to have three objects, 1, 2, 3, next to each other. In Star Wars, you can never. You have to have 1, 2, and then there's a space, and then there's a third. Because in Star Wars, everything's being fixed all the time. Every car is under construction, so at least one fender is spray-painted primer gray. And the whole time I was working on those movies and honing my skills, and even onto, after 2002, I got hired to do Mythbusters, which I've been making for the last 12 years, I still kept on building objects and things from narratives that compelled me. I spent a year replicating Indiana Jones' Father's Grail diary from the third Raiders film. Maybe the only good thing in that movie. But every last newspaper clipping and silver certificate and train ticket I put in there, I hand-weathered every page. And because when you're doing something like that, it's only marginally harder to make 12 than it is to make one, I made 12 of them. And I traded them to people for other props that I wanted. I hand-machined myself a Blade Runner gun, and actually it's out there in the lobby, and that's the third Blade Runner gun I made. I made one when I was 18, I made another one when I was 26, and the last one I made when I was doing Mythbusters, and I could afford to actually buy all the original guns that the real Blade Runner gun is made from, and hand gunsmith every single part and piece and nut and bolt to make it exactly the weight that it should be. And I'll tell you, I still pick it up from time to time. Just to feel that weight and that transformation. I also spent 14 years making the ZF-1 from The Fifth Element out there. Not 14 straight years, but looking at screenshots, building the entire thing in 3D, then finding out that Stephen Lane from the Prop Store of London had actually bought a real one, and he gave me access to it for a few hours to make measurements and then make my own totally accurate. I had to throw out the old one. I've still got it, but I wanted that total accuracy. Now, I keep on looking for projects to dive my head into. And if you love stories like I love stories and you love film, then you love Stanley Kubrick. And there's a traveling exhibition of his archives going around the world right now. And it was at LACMA in LA for a bunch of months. And if you didn't get to see it there, I exhort you to head up to Toronto after November, where it's going to be for about 6 months. It's a remarkable exhibition. Everything from his .5 lenses that he shot Barry Lyndon with, his director's chair, his archives for Napoleon, costumes from Barry Lyndon, original drawings from AI that I remember seeing and didn't realize they were from the Kubrick archives. But there was this one thing. Oh, I also saw one of the spacesuits from 2001, but I was already making one of those, so I didn't need any more reference of it. But there was a piece that really compelled me, and it was from Dr. Strangelove, maybe still my favorite of all Kubrick's movies. I'm always surprised every time I see it how both upsetting and how hilarious it is, and yet how I leave it feeling really, really unpleasant about humanity. But within that movie, there is this one object, and it's out there. It's half complete, and I don't usually show things that are half complete, but it's within the spirit here. It's Major Kong's survival pack that comes to fore somewhere around the beginning of the third act of Dr. Strangelove. So to refresh your memory, Major Kong's plane has been shot. He can't go above 150 feet, and amazingly, limping over the Russian countryside, this is what's allowing him to escape the gun batteries that the Russians are trying to use to shoot him down so he doesn't deliver the A-bomb and cause the doomsday device to kill the entire planet. And in this, Kubrick skewers every single facet of the military in this film, from the British Mandrake to the idiotic Sergeant Bat-Guano to Jack D. Ripper. The only military men within the film who show a quiet competence are the pilot and his crew of this Flying Fortress bomber, led by Slim Pickens. And as they realize that they might not deliver the bomb and they might have to ditch and they might end up in hostile territory, he pulls out this list and he starts to go through it. I'm going to read it to you. He says, 145 caliber automatic, 2 boxes of ammunition, 4 days concentrated emergency rations, 1 drug issue containing antibiotics, morphine, vitamin pills, pep pills, sleeping pills, tranquilizer pills, 1 combination Russian phrase book and Bible, $100 in rubles, $100 in gold, 9 packs of chewing gum, 1 issue prophylactics, 3 lipsticks, 3 pairs nylon stockings. Shoot, a fellow could have himself a good weekend in Las Vegas with this stuff. The line was actually supposed to be Dallas, but they were editing the movie when President Kennedy got shot, and they changed the line to Las Vegas. Now, I got home from having taken pictures of Kong's survival pack. Wow, 5 minutes. I'm going to go over time. Taking pictures of Kong's survival pack, and I started researching it. And the things I discovered when I started researching it: if you were issued condoms during the Cold War in the mid-'60s, which is when this movie was supposed to take place, you were issued Trojan Thins, and they made special ones for the military. It took me 6 months to figure out how gold would have been packaged, as they gave gold to Gary Powers when he was shot down. And they packaged it in a really clever way. Now CIA operatives use what's called a bot necklace that has different gram weights of beads, and they can pull them off and trade them for various amounts. But back then, they usually had Krugerrands, sovereigns, gold watches, and gold rings. coins, and they were cast inside a block of foam rubber so that you couldn't steal them. If you did, it was clear you had cut into the pack, and there was a whole protocol for dissolving that pack. I discovered that no survival pack in history has ever had nylon stockings or lipsticks as part of it. But of course, Kubrick's telling a whole nother story. The subtext of the Kong survival pack is telling you a whole nother story about the film because of the purpose with which he chooses those items. Now, I'm not only making one, I'm making a bunch of them, and I'm not even sure why, except I know that I don't want to sell them. I'm not interested in getting money for these. I want to trade them, because trading is a way in which actually a whole nother story gets told about the object. But why? Like, I actually grapple with this question. I have a cave in the Mission in San Francisco, and it is overwhelmingly packed with objects that I absolutely love, and there's thousands and thousands of them. And the why of it is something that I grappled with for a long time until I started going to Comic-Con. Now, Mythbusters got invited to Comic-Con about 7 years ago, and I'd always wanted to go, and I'd always known that it was deeply about costume, and so am I, clearly. So every year at Comic-Con, I put an elaborate costume together. The first year I was Hellboy. After that, I was a Stormtrooper. I was a Ring Wraith. This year, I was in the Alien spacesuit and a Mercury spacesuit that's out there in the lobby for you to see. But about 4 years ago, I put together a costume that didn't take me months to build, and it didn't cost thousands of dollars. It took 2 weeks and about $150, and it remains my favorite costume I've ever built. It's from Hayao Miyazaki's film, Spirited Away. And Spirited Away is, on one level, it's a story about a little girl coming to understand her own power, but it's also about her rescue of a sad spirit named No-Face, or Koneyashi. And No-Face is this sort of amorphous blob with a white face, and he's very sad and he's very humble. And I built this, I slumped vacuform plastic in a hole to make the oval, and then I painted it. And then, because in Spirited Away you can actually see through No-Face most of the time, and you can see that there's sort of a figure within the figure. So behind the head I vacuformed a clear plastic head that I wore on a kayak helmet strapped tightly to my jaw, which hurts like hell, and I can't see anything out of this costume. All I can see through the mouth is people's shoes. But I wore it out on the floor and walking in. Oh, also, he has these long black arms. And I wondered, how am I going to get long black arms? And I realized I live in San Francisco. I went to the drag queen store. I said, do you have long black gloves up to my arm? And they said, shiny or matte? So I walked out onto the floor, and I was No-Face. And I could see people freaking out. And if you've seen the movie, and if you ever see a 7-foot-tall No-Face costume, it is a bit arresting. I remember the first time I saw one. And people were coming up and asking for pictures, and I would bow my head, and I would take a picture with them. And then I had in my gown a lap pack full of gold chocolate coins, because this is one of the ways in the film that No-Face draws people to him. He makes gold appear in his hands, and he lures people to him. Then he eats them. He eventually vomits them all back up later in the movie, but the gold is the way he thinks that he has to make friends. So I had gold in my pack, and when people would take a picture and they'd be done, I would have one ready, and I would make it appear in a flourish, and I would give it to them, and they really were freaking out. They loved this, right? And I was like, this is great. And I could see that the otaku, the Japanese girls, the geek girls, were really freaking out about it. Oh my God, they were taking bunches of different pictures. And then after about 30 minutes, somebody grabbed my hand, and they put a gold coin back in. It was an angry gesture. And I wonder if I gave chocolate to a kid who's like allergic to chocolate or something. I didn't know. And I kept on taking pictures and giving out the coins. And then it happened again. And it happened a third time before I realized what was actually going on. What was going on was that in the film, it's bad luck to take gold from No-Face. And the attendees at Comic-Con were giving me back my gold because they wanted no part of No-Face's bad luck. And then I realized that we were all participating in a theater. That when I put on these costumes or I make these objects, they're all part and parcel of the same activity. I'm injecting myself into a narrative that has fed me, and I'm attempting to build it around myself so that I can put myself inside of it. I can feel Deckard's pistol. I can hold on to the egg gun. I can look at Bourne's bag and pretend it's over my shoulder and that I'm a secret agent. All of these things are real experiences I have with those narratives and with those objects. But I used to think that story was a one-way transmission from teller to listener. And what I realized in that moment of theater at Comic-Con was that the story not only changes, a good story not only changes the listener, but it changes the teller as well. That the story evolves every time it gets told. And we've been telling stories to each other since we sat around campfires and taught ourselves better and faster and easier ways to kill large animals with sharpened sticks. That language came about because of story. And it might be the story of a lonely 13-year-old kid trying to find his place in the world and finding solace in narratives, or it might be a 47-year-old man and his love of telling stories. But we're all part of that process, and something that evolves like that, a story, is actually something alive, and it is evolving alongside of us. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you very much.